Dante Moretti was a ghost story whispered in Chicago's back alleys. They called him the devil in a suit, the undisputed king of the underworld whose empire stretched from shipping docks to penthouses, worth over $800 million. He'd survived assassination attempts, federal indictments, and gang wars without a scratch. Then a car bomb took his sight 3 years ago, plunging his world into eternal darkness. Now, the most feared man in the city was doing something no one thought possible. He was dying. Despite unlimited wealth and armed guards surrounding his fortress penthouse, Dante was rotting from the inside out. 50 pounds lost in 3 months. Skin turned from olive to translucent gray. Nights spent thrashing in silk sheets, hallucinating demons that weren't there. His medical team, neurologists and endocrinologists from Mayo Clinic and Johns Hopkins, ran every test imaginable. Their unanimous conclusion was useless. PTSD, psychosomatic stress from the trauma of blindness. They prescribed sedatives and therapy, charging thousands per hour, while the Mafia king withered into a skeleton. But they were wrong. The doctors were looking for a disease. They should have been looking for a person. Enter Elena, a 22-year-old maid with trembling hands and negative $400 in her bank account. A ghost in a black and white uniform, hired to scrub floors and stay invisible. She was terrified of Dante, terrified of the armed men patrolling the hallways, terrified of secrets buried in the mansion's walls. But unlike the expensive doctors with their degrees and arrogance, Elena had something they didn't. Invisibility meant she saw things people did when they thought no one was watching. On a stormy Tuesday evening, inside the dining room that smelled of rain and polished mahogany, Elena saw the thing that would unravel everything. Dante sat at the head of the long table, dark glasses reflecting dim chandelier light, hand shaking as he reached for dinner. Standing over him, Chef Marco, Michelin-starred, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, presenting a bowl of medicinal broth, his grandmother's recipe to soothe the stomach. Steam rose, carrying a scent that was sweet, metallic, and wrong. As Dante lifted the silver spoon to his lips, moments from a cardiac event that would look exactly like natural causes, Elena froze in the doorway. She saw it, a tiny fleck floating in the broth, a fleck that shouldn't be there. A fleck she'd seen earlier that day in a place that made her blood run cold. Panic overrode fear. Breaking the house's strictest rule, never disturb the master, Elena screamed. She sprinted across marble and slapped the spoon from the blind man's hand. The bowl shattered. Hot soup splattered across expensive Persian rug. Silence descended like a guillotine. Chef Marco didn't apologize, didn't gasp. He reached into his apron and pulled out a suppressed pistol, leveling it at the maid's chest. In that split second, the blind king realized a truth his millions couldn't buy. The enemy wasn't the police, wasn't a rival gang. The enemy had been serving him dinner. Because what Elena saw floating in that broth wasn't a spice. It was a leaf from a plant that proved the most powerful man in the city wasn't dying of stress. He was being poisoned, slowly, deliberately, eaten alive from the inside out. But to understand why a terrified 22-year-old would risk a bullet to save a monster, we have to go back 2 weeks. Back to the night Elena realized scrubbing floors for minimum wage wouldn't save her sister. Elena wasn't just broke, she was hunted. Her father died 3 months ago, leaving behind a rusted sedan, a box of photographs, and a $50,000 gambling debt to the Petrov Bratva. The Russian mob didn't care that he was dead. In their world, debt was a family inheritance. They'd given Elena 30 days. If she didn't have the cash by month's end, they wouldn't take her car or apartment. They'd take Sophia, her 14-year-old sister. Elena needed a miracle. The devil was hearing. The listing appeared on a private server for high-end domestic staff, live-in cleaning associate, NDA required, 0 criminal record, $5,000 week, condition, must work in silence. When Elena's battered Honda pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the Moretti estate, she felt like she was entering a mausoleum. The mansion perched on a cliff overlooking Lake Michigan, a sprawling Gothic beast of gray stone and black windows. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress built to keep the world out. Or something dangerous in. Inside, the air was unnaturally cold. Heavy velvet curtains choked every window, blocking the midday sun, trapping the house in perpetual, suffocating twilight. A house designed for a man who lived in darkness. "You're late." The voice cut from the shadows. Mrs. Vance, the head housekeeper, stepped into the dim foyer light. She was sharp angles and steel wool in a uniform that hadn't changed since the 1950s. Her clinical gaze traveled down Elena's body, lingering on scuffed sneakers. I'm sorry, the traffic." "Rule number 1. Mrs. Vance's voice had no warmth. "Silence. Mr. Morty's hearing has become acute since the accident. Heels clicking on marble give him migraines. You'll wear rubber-soled shoes. You won't speak unless spoken to, which will be never. No perfume. And you will never, under any circumstances, look him in the eye." Elena nodded, swallowing fear like broken glass. "I understand." "I don't think you do." Mrs. Vance stepped closer. "We went through 3 maids last month, one fired for coughing, another for dropping a dustpan. This isn't a hotel, girl. This is a hospice." She gestured toward the grand staircase disappearing into second-floor gloom. "Mr. Morty is dying. Doctors say weeks, maybe days. His mind is unraveling. He's paranoid, volatile, dangerous. Your job is to clean the dust from his grave without waking the corpse." Her eyes bored into Elena's. "Can you handle that?" Elena thought of the Russians, thought of Sophia's face. "Yes," she whispered. "I can be invisible." Mrs. Vance turned her back. "Good. Start with the master bedroom." A pause. "And pray he doesn't hear you breathe." The master bedroom was vast, a cavern of mahogany and black silk that felt more like a prison cell than a sanctuary. The air was thick with stale sweat, antiseptic, and expensive sandalwood cologne. The smell of a man trying to mask his own decay. Elena moved like a ghost, rubber-soled shoes silent on plush carpet. She dusted the nightstand, eyes darting to pill bottles lined up like orange soldiers. Sedatives, painkillers, beta-blockers, enough chemistry to knock out a horse. Yet the man who lived here was getting worse by the hour. The heavy oak doors crashed open. Elena froze, heart slamming against ribs. She pressed into the corner behind velvet drapes, praying shadows would swallow her whole. Dante Moretti stumbled into the room. A terrifying ruin of a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a bespoke suit that now hung like a shroud on his frame, a marble statue left in acid rain. Skin sickly translucent gray, cold sweat beading his forehead despite the chill. He ripped his silk tie off with trembling hands, gasping as if the room had no oxygen. 3 unsteady steps toward the bed. Then he collapsed, knees hitting floor with a sickening thud. Elena held her breath, hands clamped over her mouth. Be invisible, be nothing. But she'd made a mistake. She'd washed her uniform in cheap lavender detergent. Dante's head snapped up. His blind eyes, clouded with milky white film, stared unseeing across the room, locking onto her corner with terrifying precision. His nostrils flared. "Who's there?" The voice was a low, jagged growl. Before Elena could whimper, Dante's hand flew to his waistband. He drew a silver pistol in one fluid motion and leveled it at the darkness where she stood. His hand shook, but the barrel was steady enough to kill. "I said, who's there?" he roared. "Did the Russians send you? Answer me." Elena squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the bullet. It never came. Instead, a wet, hacking sound tore through the room. Dante doubled over, the gun slipping from his grip and clattering on hardwood. He clutched his chest, coughing so violently his entire body convulsed. Not a normal cough, it sounded like his lungs were drowning. He gagged, trying to inhale, choking harder. He was dying, right there on the rug. Elena's instinct overrode orders. She forgot the rules, forgot the gun. She grabbed the crystal pitcher from the nightstand, poured water, and rushed to his side. "Drink." Her voice trembled as she pressed the cool glass to his cracked lips. "Please." Dante flinched at her touch, body rigid, but desperation won. He drank greedily, water spilling down his chin. For a moment, the coughing subsided. He slumped against the bed frame, chest heaving, blind eyes wide and vulnerable. For just a second, he wasn't the devil of Chicago. He was a terrified man in the dark. Then the mask slammed back. He slapped the glass away, sending it spinning across the floor. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist, grip surprisingly weak, face twisting into a snarl. "You," he recognized the scent. "The maid." I was just cleaning, sir. I'm sorry." Dante shoved her away, groping blindly until his fingers found his gun. He didn't point it at her this time, just held it close, like a security blanket. "Get out," he rasped, turning his face away. "Get out." A pause, his breathing still ragged. "And don't let me hear you exist again." Elena fled the room, but the image of the crumbling king stayed with her. Over the next week, the mansion became a parade of useless experts. First came the neurologists from Northwestern, graying hair, gold watches, hushed reverent tones. Then cardiologists from Cleveland Clinic with portable EKG machines and miles of scrolling paper. Finally, psychiatrists who smelled of vanilla and condescension. From the corners, invisible in her black uniform, Elena watched them all. She dusted bookshelves while they shined lights into Dante's unseeing eyes, polished mirrors while they drew vials of his dark, sluggish blood. Every time, the verdict was the same. Mr. Morty, Dr. Sterling, the lead physician, stood at the foot of Dante's bed on a rainy Thursday, adjusting his glasses. "We've run toxicology screens, MRIs, checked for autoimmune disorders." A pause. "There's nothing physically wrong with you." Dante lay propped on pillows, his face a mask of exhaustion. "Nothing wrong." His voice was sandpaper. "I can't walk across the room without my heart trying to beat out of my chest. My skin feels like it's on fire." "It's psychosomatic, sir," Dr. Sterling wrote smoothly on his prescription pad. "Trauma from the explosion, loss of your sight. You've developed severe anxiety that mimics systemic failure. Your body is fighting a war that only exists in your mind." "So I'm crazy." "You're stressed." The doctor didn't look up. "We're increasing your Valium. You need rest. You need to accept your new reality." They left him with pills and a pat on the shoulder, confident in their diagnosis. Elena, silently scrubbing floorboards near the door, frowned. She didn't have a medical degree, didn't have a PhD, but she'd grown up with a diabetic grandmother, and she knew what a sick body looked like. More importantly, she knew how to watch. The doctors only saw Dante for an hour at a time, usually mid-afternoon. But Elena was there all day, and she began to notice something the million-dollar specialists had missed entirely. A pattern. In the mornings when Dante woke, he was weak but lucid. He could sit up, yell at his security team, drink his coffee without shaking hands. By lunch, tired but functional. Then came evening. Every single night the decline was clockwork. At 6:00 p.m. fine. By 8:00 p.m. slurring words. By 9:00 p.m. hallucinations started. By midnight, thrashing in sheets, gasping for air, clutching his chest as if an invisible hand were crushing his heart. The doctors called it night terrors, said darkness triggered his PTSD. But Elena looked at the clock. Darkness didn't start at 8:00 p.m. Dinner did. She watched the trays go up, watched the empty bowls come down, and a cold, terrifying realization took root in her stomach. Dante wasn't stressed. He wasn't crazy. He was being poisoned. And it was happening right under the noses of the smartest doctors in the world. But if she was right, that meant someone in this house was a killer. Someone who walked these halls every day. Someone who smiled and served and waited. Someone Elena had already met. If dinner was the weapon, then the kitchen was the armory. And the man guarding it was Chef Marco. Marco wasn't just a cook, he was a culinary celebrity. Before the accident, he'd run one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, known for his temper as much as his truffles. Dante had hired him exclusively to manage his recovery diet, paying a surgeon's salary. But downstairs, away from guests' eyes, Marco was a tyrant. The kitchen was gleaming stainless steel and copper, smelling of rosemary and reduction sauces. Unlike the silent house above, it buzzed with tension. sous chefs kept heads down, terrified to make eye contact. Marco prowled the stations like a shark, tasting sauces and throwing entire pans in the sink if they weren't perfect. Elena's new duty: collect dinner trays from the service elevator. Simple task, but it put her directly in the beast's den. Tuesday evening, Elena entered just as Marco prepared the boss's nightly special, a rich, aromatic tomato basil soup. She watched from the doorway, trying to blend into shadows. Marco stood at a private prep station in the far corner, back to the rest of the staff. He opened a small cabinet mounted on the wall. It didn't look like a spice rack. It looked like a safe. He pressed his thumb against a biometric scanner. Beep, the lock disengaged. From inside, he pulled a small glass vial filled with fine, grayish-green powder. Girl! Elena jumped. Marco had spun around, catching her starring. His face, usually flushed from stove heat, went cold. I'm here for the tray, chef. You're early, Marco snapped, shoving the vial into his pocket. He strode across the kitchen, wiping hands on his apron. Wait by the door. Do not enter my workspace. Elena nodded, but her eyes drifted back to the soup simmering on the stove. It smells bitter, she murmured, almost to herself. Marco froze. He closed the distance in 2 strides, hand shooting out to grab her wrist. His grip was painful, fingernails digging into skin. What did you say? His breath smelled of espresso and cigarettes. Nothing, Elena gasped, trying to pull away. I just meant, it smells strong, like herbs. Marco leaned close, voice dropping to a menacing whisper. This is a special recipe from Mr. Morty's grandmother. It has rare herbs for his digestion, herbs you wouldn't understand. His grip tightened. No one touches the boss's soup but me. You understand. If I see you near that pot, I'll have you fired before you can blink. He shoved her toward the door. Now wait outside. Elena rubbed her bruised wrist, heart hammering. She watched through the cracked door as Marco returned to the soup. He took the vial from his pocket, sprinkled gray powder into the broth, stirred slowly. But he didn't put the empty vial in recycling with other glass jars. Instead, he walked to the back door, unlocked a heavy padlock on a separate small trash can, dropped the vial inside. Relocked it immediately. Elena felt ice flood her veins. Grandmothers didn't use biometric safes. Chefs didn't lock their trash. The soup wasn't medicine. It was a death sentence, 1 spoonful at a time. And Chef Marco wasn't cooking dinner. He was committing murder. But why? Marco had the perfect job, prestige, obscene pay, access to the most powerful man in Chicago. What could possibly be worth throwing that away? Unless he was being paid more. Unless someone wanted Dante Moretti dead badly enough to plant a killer in his own kitchen. Someone with resources, someone with patience, someone who knew that a slow poison would look exactly like the decline of a traumatized, broken man. Elena's mind raced. The Russians, a rival family, or someone even closer. She glanced back through the crack in the door. Marco was smiling as he ladled the soup into a porcelain bowl. The mansion slept, but Elena lay awake in her narrow servant's bed, staring at the ceiling. The image of Marco dropping that vial into the locked bin replayed like a nightmare on loop. If she was wrong and got caught snooping, she'd be fired. Or worse. The security guards didn't ask questions before drawing weapons, but if she was right, every spoonful Dante swallowed was pushing him closer to a grave. At 3:00 a.m., the silence was absolute. Elena slipped from her room, barefoot, holding her breath. She crept down service stairs, past the snoring guard in the hallway, into the kitchen. Moonlight filtered through high windows, glinting off butcher knives hanging on the magnetic strip. The back door to the loading dock was alarmed, but she'd watched the kitchen staff long enough. 1985. She punched it in. The light turned green. She stepped into cool night air. The locked trash bin stood in the corner, chained to a post. Heavy-duty industrial container, labeled for hazardous waste. Elena pulled a bobby pin from her hair. Her father hadn't just taught her about gambling debts. He'd taught her how to open things she wasn't supposed to. Her hands shook, but after 2 agonizing minutes, the padlock clicked. She lifted the lid. Rotting vegetables hit her nostrils, but right on top, resting on coffee grounds, sat the small glass vial. She snatched it and ducked back inside, locking the door behind her. Under the faint microwave clock light, she examined her prize. Not a commercial spice jar. No barcode, no Best By date, just a small hand-printed label with a single word in cursive script. Digitalis. Elena pulled out her phone, cracked screen spiderwebbing across the glass, but still working. She typed the word into the search bar. Digitalis purpurea, common name, foxglove. She scrolled past pictures of pretty purple flowers to medical effects. Her blood turned to ice. Symptoms of toxicity, nausea, weakness, halo vision and visual disturbances, confusion, irregular heartbeat. A perfect checklist of Dante's life. But the next paragraph stopped her breathing. In controlled doses, Digitalis is a heart medication. In slightly higher doses, administered over time, it becomes a cumulative poison. It builds up in body tissues, slowly weakening the heart muscle until it stops completely. Cause of death often misdiagnosed as natural cardiac arrest. Elena's hands trembled. It wasn't a clumsy murder attempt. It was a masterpiece. They weren't trying to kill him quickly. If Dante died suddenly, his empire would crumble into chaos. Rival families would go to war. Federal investigators would swarm. No, they were keeping him sick. Weak, hallucinating, pliable. So someone powerful could pull the strings while the king was too drugged to notice. While someone else took his throne. Marco was the executioner, but he wasn't the architect. A chef didn't care about running a crime syndicate. Someone was paying him. Elena looked at the vial, then at the ceiling toward the master bedroom. Dante wasn't dying of a broken heart. He was being murdered by his dinner. And in less than 18 hours, Marco would serve the next bowl. A floorboard creaked behind her. Elena spun around, heart exploding in her chest. A figure stood in the kitchen doorway, backlit by the hallway light, tall, silent, watching. She couldn't see the face, but she could see the outline of a gun in their hand. Looking for something, the voice was calm, almost amused. Elena's fingers tightened around the vial. She had 2 choices, run or talk. Both would probably get her killed. Looking for something. Elena's heart stopped. The figure in the doorway stepped forward into the pale light. Not Marco. Not a guard. Mrs. Vance. The head housekeeper stood rigid, arms crossed, eyes sharp as broken glass. No gun, Elena had mistaken the silhouette of a wooden spoon in her apron. I thought I heard rats, Elena stammered, shoving the vial deep into her pocket. In the trash. Mrs. Vance's gaze traveled to the unlocked bin, to Elena's trembling hands, to the faint glow of her phone screen. A long, terrible silence. Then, clean it up, lock it, get back to your room. Elena's knees nearly buckled. You're not going to. I said get out. Mrs. Vance's voice was ice. Before I change my mind. Elena fled, pulse hammering in her skull. She didn't know if Mrs. Vance believed her, didn't know if she'd tell Marco, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. In less than 18 hours, Marco would serve the next bowl. And this time, it might be the last. The next day crawled by in agonizing suspense. Elena scrubbed floors, but her eyes were fixed on the clock, counting down minutes until sunset. The sky turned bruised purple, and by 6:00 p.m., a violent storm battered the mansion windows, mirroring the chaos about to unfold inside. In the dining room, the atmosphere was suffocating. Dante sat at the head of the table, looking more corpse than king. Skin the color of ash, breathing ragged and shallow. He wasn't alone tonight. Sitting to his right, Enzo, his cousin and second in command. Enzo was everything Dante wasn't right now, healthy, sharp, and hungry. He wore a suit worth more than Elena's life, pushing a stack of legal documents toward the blind man's hand. "Just sign the papers, Dante." Enzo's voice was smooth as oil. "Power of attorney, temporary, just until you get your strength back. I'll handle the Russians, I'll handle the territory, you just need to rest." Dante's hand trembled, pen hovering over the signature line. I don't know, Enzo, my head's spinning." "That's the stress, cousin, just sign." Enzo leaned closer. "Then eat your soup. Marco made it special." On cue, the double doors swung open. Chef Marco entered, carrying a silver tray. The smell hit Elena before he reached the table, that same sweet, metallic scent of herbs masking the bitter taste of death. Elena stood by the sideboard, heart hammering like a trapped bird. She watched Marco place the steaming bowl before Dante. "Eat, sir." Marco's voice dripped faux concern. "It will settle your nerves." Dante nodded weakly. He dropped the pen, picked up his spoon. His hand shook so badly the liquid rippled. He raised it slowly toward his lips. Enzo was smiling, small, cruel, the smile of a man watching a crown fall into his lap. Elena looked at the spoon, at the guards by the door, at Dante's pale throat, about to swallow another dose of poison that might finally stop his heart. "Do it," she screamed internally. "Do it now." "No." The scream tore from Elena's throat, shattering the silence. She didn't think, didn't plan. She flew across the room in 3 strides, ignoring shocked gasps from the guards. Just as the spoon touched Dante's lips, Elena lunged. She slapped the bowl with all her strength. Crash. Fine china exploded against the wall. Hot, thick soup splashed over the table, over Dante's suit, scalding Elena's hand with blistering heat. The room froze. For a heartbeat, only the rain lashing windows and Dante's sharp intake of breath. Then chaos. Enzo shot from his chair, face twisting from shock to rage. "What the hell are you doing?" he roared. "She's crazy, she's attacking him." He pointed a shaking finger at Elena. "Guards, she's trying to kill him. Shoot her now." The 2 security guards drew their weapons, barrels swinging toward Elena's chest. She stood trembling, clutching her burned hand, positioned between the blind king and his poisoned dinner, waiting for the bullet. But Dante raised one hand, slowly, deliberately. "Wait." His voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The guards hesitated, fingers still on triggers. Dante turned his blind eyes toward Elena's voice. "Why?" he rasped. "Why would a maid risk her life to slap soup from my hand?" Elena's voice shook, but she forced the words out. "Because that soup is killing you, Mr. Morty." She pulled the vial from her pocket, held it up with trembling fingers. "Because this is what's been in every bowl for months. Digitalis, foxglove poison." The room went deathly silent. Enzo's smile vanished. Marco's face drained of color. And Dante Moretti, the blind king of Chicago, slowly began to laugh. And Dante Moretti, the blind king of Chicago, slowly began to laugh. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a deep, rumbling sound that grew louder and more unhinged with each breath. His shoulders shook. Tears leaked from beneath his dark glasses. Elena stood frozen, vial still clutched in her burned hand, wondering if the poison had finally broken his mind. Then Dante's laughter cut off like a guillotine. "Foxglove," he said softly, almost fondly. "My own cousin is trying to kill me with my grandmother's favorite flower." Enzo went rigid. "Dante, I don't know what this insane girl—" "Shut up." The 2 words were quieter than a whisper, but carried the weight of a death sentence. Dante reached into his jacket with deliberate slowness. Elena flinched, expecting a gun. Instead, he pulled out a white handkerchief and wiped the soup from his lapel with meticulous care. Then he turned his blind eyes toward where Marco stood by the kitchen door. "Marco." The chef went pale as milk. "Why, yes, Mr. Morty." "Come here." Marco walked forward on trembling legs, his Michelin-star arrogance evaporating with every step. "This is my grandmother's recipe, correct?" Dante's voice was silk over razors. "Good for the stomach, healing herbs." Yes, of course, sir." "Good." Dante gestured to the orange puddle soaking into the Persian rug. "Then prove this maid is crazy. Get down on your knees and lick it up." The room held its breath. Marco's face drained of color. "Sir, that's unsanitary, I cannot." "I don't care about hygiene." Dante's voice hardened into steel. "I care about ingredients. If it's just soup, eat it. If it's poison." He tilted his head. "Well, then you have a problem." Marco didn't move. Sweat poured down his temples. His eyes darted to Enzo, desperate for intervention. Enzo looked away. "Eat it." Dante's tone was almost conversational now. "Or I'll have my guards hold you down and pour it down your throat. Your choice." "I can't," Marco's voice cracked. "I can't do it." "Why not?" Silence. "Why not?" Dante slammed his fist on the table, making everyone jump. "Because it will stop my heart." Marco collapsed to his knees, sobbing. "Because it's poison. Because I've been poisoning you for 3 months, and if I eat it, I'll die." The confession shattered the air like breaking glass. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Then Enzo lunged for the door. Despite his blindness, despite his weakened state, Dante moved with the muscle memory of 1,000 gunfights. His hand flew to his shoulder holster. Drew, aimed at the sound of running footsteps. Bang! The shot punched into the doorframe an inch from Enzo's head. Splinters exploded. Enzo froze, hands raised. "Sit down, cousin." Dante's gun tracked Enzo's movement with eerie precision, following the sound of his breathing. "Marco just told me what's in the soup. Now you're going to tell me who paid for the recipe." Enzo's face twisted with rage and fear. "You're finished, Dante. You're weak. Half the families are waiting for you to die so they can carve up your territory. I'm just speeding things along." Dante's smile was terrible. "How much?" "What?" "How much is my life worth to you, cousin? What's the going rate for a king these days?" Enzo said nothing. Marco, still sobbing on the floor, raised a shaking finger toward Enzo. "$5 million! He promised me $5 million, he said. He said the family needed a strong leader. He said you were already dead, just too stubborn to lie down." Dante nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd suspected all along. "Guards," he said quietly. "Take my cousin to the basement, lock him in the wine cellar, make sure he's comfortable." His smile widened. "We're going to have a very long conversation about family loyalty." As the guards dragged a screaming Enzo toward the door, Dante turned his attention to Marco. "Chef, you have 10 seconds to tell me everything. Who else is involved? Who gave you the foxglove? How long has this been happening?" Marco opened his mouth, terror in his eyes. Then his expression changed. Just for a flash, something calculating crossed his face. He lunged for something inside his chef's coat. Elena screamed. "He has a..." Bang, bang. 2 shots, not from Dante's gun. From the hallway. Marco crumpled, blood blooming across his white uniform. He hit the floor and didn't move. Everyone spun toward the doorway. Mrs. Vance stood there, small revolver still smoking in her wrinkled hands. Her face was calm, almost serene. "He was reaching for a knife, Mr. Morty," she said quietly. "I couldn't let him harm you." Dante tilted his head, listening to her voice with sudden, focused intensity. "Mrs. Vance, you've been with this family for 30 years. 32, sir. And in all that time, I never knew you carried a gun." A pause. The rain hammered against the windows. "A good housekeeper is always prepared, sir." Mrs. Vance's voice didn't waver. "Someone has to protect this house." She looked down at Marco's body, without emotion. "Shall I call the cleaners?" Dante was very still, too still. Elena felt ice crawl down her spine. Something was wrong. Something about the way Mrs. Vance stood. The way she'd shot Marco before he could talk. the way she was still holding the gun. "Yes," Dante said finally. "Call them and Mrs. Vance." "Sir, thank you for your loyalty." The word hung in the air like a noose. Mrs. Vance smiled. "Of course, sir. Family first, always." She turned and walked calmly from the room. Elena stared at the empty doorway, her mind racing. Mrs. Vance had caught her in the kitchen last night, had seen the unlocked trash bin, had let her go. Why? Unless she wanted Elena to discover the poison. Unless she needed someone else to expose Marco and Enzo. Unless there was a third player in this game, and she'd been watching from the shadows all along. Elena looked at Dante, slumped in his chair, blind and exhausted. She'd saved him from one killer. But how many more were waiting in this house? The guards didn't need orders. They seized Enzo, dragging him kicking and screaming from the dining room. His pleas for mercy faded down the hallway, followed by the heavy thud of the basement door locking. Whatever justice awaited him in the soundproof rooms below would not be swift. And it would not be legal. Marco's body was already gone. Mrs. Vance had been efficient as always, too efficient. Elena watched the older woman supervise the cleaning crew, directing them with calm precision as they scrubbed blood from antique wood. Not a tremor in her hands, not a flicker of emotion on her face. Like she'd done this before. Many times before. When Mrs. Vance's eyes met Elena's across the room, she smiled. Warm, almost maternal. Elena felt ice flood her veins. The adrenaline that had sustained Dante finally crashed. He slumped in his chair, the gun slipping from his fingers. The poison was still in his system, and shock had drained his remaining strength. "Sir," Elena whispered, stepping closer. "No doctors." Dante's voice was gravel. He tried to stand but failed. "No more doctors, they didn't see it, only you saw it." He turned his blind eyes toward her. "Only you." For the next 3 days, the mansion went into lockdown. Dante refused to see anyone but Elena. He lay in the massive master bed, shivering through withdrawal as toxins slowly leached from his blood. His body was purging months of accumulated poison, violent, painful, necessary. Elena became his nurse, his guard, his lifeline. She didn't trust the kitchen staff, so she cooked for him herself. Simple broths and oatmeal made on a hot plate in the room, using water from sealed bottles she personally opened. She sat by his bedside for hours, wiping cold sweat from his forehead, watching the gray pallor of his skin slowly return to healthy olive. She also watched the door. Mrs. Vance came by twice daily with fresh linens. Each time, her eyes lingered on Dante's recovering face, just a fraction too long. Each time, Elena felt the weight of calculation behind that pleasant smile. On the third night, the fever broke. Dante woke clear-headed for the first time in months. He found Elena asleep in the armchair beside his bed, uniform wrinkled, hand resting near his. He watched her breathe, listened to the soft rhythm, let himself feel something he hadn't allowed in years. "Trust." "Who are you?" His voice was rough with disuse. Elena jolted awake. I'm Elena, sir, the maid." "No," Dante turned his head toward her voice. "You're not just a maid. A maid would have let me drink the soup. A maid would have run when the guns came out." A pause. "Who are you really?" Elena looked at her hands. "I'm just a girl who knows what it's like to be hunted." She told him everything. The gambling debt, the Russian mob, the threat to 14-year-old Sophia. The reason she'd taken a job in a house of shadows, knowing it might kill her. Dante listened in silence, expression unreadable behind dark glasses. When she finished, he reached out a hand. "Give me the phone." Elena handed him the secure cell from the nightstand. Dante dialed from memory. He spoke for less than a minute, voice low, cold, and final. "The Petrov debt is mine now. 50,000 plus interest. I'll wire it today." A pause. Elena could hear shouting on the other end. "And Dmitri, if you or any of your men ever look at the girl or her sister again, I will burn your operation to the ground. We clear." He hung up, held out his hand, searching for hers. Elena hesitated, then placed her small hand in his large, calloused one. "The debt is cleared," Dante said softly. "The men who threatened you are aware of the new situation. You don't have to be afraid anymore." "Why?" Elena's voice cracked. "Why would you do that?" "Because you saved my life when everyone else was watching me die." His thumb traced slow circles on her palm. "You gave me back my sight, Elena. I may be blind, but I see you clearly now." He pulled her closer. His fingertips found her face, tentative at first, then more certain, tracing the line of her jaw, her cheekbones, the curve of her lips, learning her features in darkness. The touch was intimate, electric. It made Elena's breath hitch. "You saved the king," Dante whispered, "and now the king is in your debt." His hand cupped her cheek. "I don't have much to offer right now. I'm blind, poisoned. My own cousin tried to murder me. Half my organization probably thinks I'm already dead." A bitter smile. "But what I do have, my protection, my resources, my life, it's yours, if you want it." Elena's heart hammered. She should pull away, should remember who this man was, what he'd done, the empire of violence he'd built. But his hand was warm against her face, and for the first time in months, she felt safe. "I want..." A knock at the door cut her off. They both froze. "Mr. Morty," Mrs. Vance's voice, sweet as poisoned honey. "I have your evening medication. May I come in?" Elena's eyes went wide. She mouthed silently, "You don't take medication anymore." Dante's jaw tightened. He didn't release Elena's hand. "I'm resting, Mrs. Vance," he called out. "Leave it outside." "I really should administer it personally, sir. Doctor's orders." "I said leave it." A long pause. "Of course, sir, as you wish." Footsteps retreated down the hall. Elena waited until the sound faded completely, then rushed to the door. She cracked it open, looking both ways. A small silver tray sat on the floor. On it, a glass of water and a single pill in a white paper cup. Elena picked up the pill cup with trembling fingers, brought it back to the light. The pill was white, oval, unmarked. She pulled out her phone, took a photo, ran a reverse image search. Her blood turned to ice. "What is it?" Dante asked. Elena's voice shook. "It's not medication, it's a stronger dose of digitalis." The room went deathly quiet. "She's still trying to kill you," Elena whispered. "Enzo and Marco were just the visible threats, but Mrs. Vance..." Dante's expression hardened into something terrible. "How long has she worked for this family?" 32 years, she said. "And my father died of a heart attack 30 years ago." Dante's voice was barely audible. "In his sleep, no warning. Doctors said it was natural." The implications hung in the air like a noose. Elena felt her hands start to shake. "What do we do?" Dante was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was not a kind smile. "We make her think it's working. But in the underworld, peace is just the eye of the storm." Over the next 48 hours, Dante and Elena played a dangerous game. Each evening, Mrs. Vance delivered medication. Each evening, Elena accepted it with a grateful smile. And each evening, after the housekeeper left, they flushed the digitalis down the toilet. But Dante didn't get better, not visibly. He forced himself to stay weak, to tremble when he walked, to clutch his chest and gasp for air whenever Mrs. Vance was near. He was a master at playing the dying king, because he'd been living it for months. "She's watching," Dante murmured one evening after Mrs. Vance left, "waiting for me to finally collapse." "Why don't we just confront her?" Elena whispered. "You have guards, you have proof." "Because she's been doing this for 30 years. Dante's voice was cold. "She didn't survive this long by being careless. If we move too soon, we won't know who else is involved, how deep this goes." He was right, and Elena hated it. But Dante had underestimated one thing. Mrs. Vance's patience had limits. Enzo hadn't acted alone. He'd promised Dante's territory to the rival Valenti family in exchange for their support. When Enzo vanished into the basement and stopped answering calls, the Valenti bosses realized their quiet coup had failed. If Dante recovered, he would come for them with the wrath of God. Their only option was to strike first, hard, fast, before the king could stand. Mrs. Vance made a phone call. And that night, the storm returned with a vengeance. Elena was sitting by Dante's bed, his hand holding hers, when the lights died. Not a flicker. The entire mansion plunged into absolute, suffocating blackness. The security system gave a dying beep and went silent. "Stay down." Dante's whisper was instant. No panic. While Elena's eyes struggled to adjust, he slid from bed with fluid grace. For the first time in days, he moved like himself. Strong, certain. He was home in the darkness. The sound of shattering glass echoed from downstairs. Heavy boots on marble, shouting, gunfire. The perimeter guards were down. "They're coming up the stairs," Dante said, checking his pistol's magazine with practiced efficiency. "Elena, I need you to be my eyes. Can you do that?" I can't see anything," Elena whimpered. "You don't need to see them." He pulled her behind the heavy oak wardrobe. "Just tell me where the sound is coming from." The bedroom doors exploded inward. Flashlight beams cut through darkness, blinding and chaotic. 3 men in tactical gear swept inside. "Clear left, check the bed," one shouted. Elena peered through the crack in the wardrobe, saw their silhouettes against the beams. "2 by the door," she whispered against Dante's ear. "1 moving to the bed, 9 o'clock. Dante stepped from the shadows, raised his gun. Pop, pop. 2 shots, 2 bodies hit the floor. The third man spun, firing blindly into darkness. "He's here, he's armed. The bastard can shoot." "Behind the sofa," Elena screamed. "Low, right side." Dante adjusted his aim, a fraction of an inch, and fired. The third man dropped. For the next 10 minutes, the bedroom became a kill box. The attackers were disoriented by darkness, tripping over furniture, their flashlights making them perfect targets. But Dante moved like smoke. He knew exactly where the floorboards creaked, exactly how many steps between dresser and door. Guided by Elena's whispers, the blind king was invincible. But there were too many. A 4th man crashed through the balcony window behind them. Before Dante could turn, the attacker grabbed Elena, arm wrapping around her throat, gun pressed to her temple. "Drop it," the man screamed. "Drop the gun, blind man, or I paint the wall with her brains." Dante froze, lowered his weapon slowly. "That's right," the attacker sneered. "Now kick it over here." The man thought he'd won, thought he was holding a helpless girl. But he didn't know Elena had spent the last week watching a man fight for his life. And he didn't know Dante Moretti didn't need eyes to aim. He just needed a sound. "Elena," Dante said calmly, "scream." Elena bit down hard on the attacker's arm. The man howled in pain. That was all Dante needed. The scream pinpointed the target perfectly. He raised his gun and fired a single shot in darkness. The bullet whizzed past Elena's ear and struck the attacker between the eyes. He crumbled backward, dead before hitting the floor. Dante was at her side in a second, pulling her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "I've got you. I've got you." Elena's hands clutched his shirt, shaking. "Is it over?" "Not yet." Dante's voice was grim. "This was just the first wave. They'll regroup and—" A slow clap echoed from the doorway. They both froze. Mrs. Vance stood silhouetted in the frame, emergency lights from the hallway casting her in an eerie red glow. She wasn't alone. 4 more armed men flanked her, weapons raised. But it was the small revolver in her wrinkled hand that made Elena's blood turn to ice. The same gun that had killed Marco. "Well done, Mr. Moretti." Mrs. Vance's voice was warm, almost proud. "I must say I've underestimated you. Most men would have died months ago, but you always were stubborn." She stepped into the room, shoes crunching on broken glass. "Just like your father." Dante went perfectly still. "What did you say?" "Your father." Mrs. Vance smiled. Antonio Morty, good man, strong leader, but he made the same mistake you did. She gestured to Elena. He trusted the wrong person. The gun swung toward Elena's chest. Mrs. Vance worked for my family, she continued conversationally. For 32 years, not for yours, she was insurance, a sleeper agent waiting for the day the Valentines needed the Mortys. Removed. Dante's face went white. You killed my father. Digitalis in his evening cognac, every night for 6 months. Mrs. Vance's expression didn't change. He died in his sleep, peaceful, natural, no one suspected a thing. She cocked the hammer. You should have died the same way, Dante, quiet, dignified, but this girl. Her eyes locked on Elena, she ruined everything. So now we do this the messy way. Dante shifted, putting himself between Elena and the gun. Move aside, Mr. Morty, Mrs. Vance said softly, or I shoot through you to get to her. You'll have to. Mrs. Vance sighed. So be it. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Elena closed her eyes. Then the window behind Mrs. Vance exploded inward. Not glass breaking, detonation. The shockwave threw everyone to the floor. Elena's ears rang. Smoke filled the room. Through the chaos, she heard boots hitting hardwood, heavy military precision. Not the Valentines. Someone else. Dark figures poured through the shattered window, moving with lethal efficiency. Red laser sights cut through the smoke. Commands barked in clipped, professional tones. Target down, secure the package. Mrs. Vance scrambled for her gun, but a boot crushed her wrist. She screamed. One of the figures zip-tied her hands with brutal efficiency, dragging her toward the window. Wait, Dante's voice cut through the chaos. Who are you? A figure stepped forward. Tall, female, expensive tactical gear. She pulled off her night vision goggles, revealing sharp eyes and a face that could have been carved from marble. Sofia Castellano, FBI Organized Crime Task Force. She holstered her weapon. We've had Mrs. Vance under surveillance for 18 months. She's been the Valenti family's inside agent for 3 decades. We have records of 12 suspected murders, including your father. Dante's jaw tightened. And you waited until now to move. We needed her to make contact with her handlers. Tonight, she did. Agent Castellano gestured to her team, hauling Mrs. Vance away. We have enough to dismantle the entire Valenti operation. You're welcome. She turned to leave, then paused. Mr. Morty, you should know there will be questions about tonight, about Enzo, about a lot of things. Her eyes were hard. I suggest you get a very good lawyer. Then she was gone, rappelling out the window with her team, Mrs. Vance's screams fading into the night. Dante and Elena stood in the wreckage, ears still ringing. Is it over? Elena whispered. Dante was silent for a long moment. No, it's never over, but we bought ourselves time. He pulled her close, and I know exactly how to use it. 2 weeks later. The mansion was transformed. Heavy curtains pulled back, sunlight flooding rooms for the first time in years. The smell of sickness and medicine replaced by fresh espresso and lake breeze. Dante Moretti stood by the study window. Changed. The gray pallor of poison gone, replaced by healthy olive tone. He wore a crisp black suit, tailored to perfection, shoulders broad and strong. No longer the crumbling statue. The king again. But when Elena entered, the king softened. Come here. He didn't turn. He knew her footsteps by heart now. Elena walked to the desk. She wasn't wearing the maid's uniform anymore. A simple sundress instead, fabric rustling softly. Dante reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, slid it across mahogany. Elena opened it. Inside, a cashier's check for $10 million, a passport with her photo and a new name, keys to a townhouse in Barcelona. You're free, Elena, Dante said quietly. The debt is paid. The enemies are scattered. The FBI has what they need. He paused. You don't have to stay in this world anymore. Take it. Go live a life full of light. Elena looked at the check. Then at the man standing in sunlight, the man who had shielded her body with his own when bullets flew. Slowly, deliberately, she picked up the check and tore it in half. The sound echoed in the silent room. Dante's head tilted, expression shifting from stoic to stunned. "Elena." "I don't want the money," she said, voice steady, "and I don't want to leave." She walked around the desk and took his hand. "You said you need eyes to see your enemies. I say you need someone who sees you, not the king, not the legend, just you." She squeezed his fingers. "I'm not going anywhere." For the first time since the explosion took his sight, Dante Moretti smiled. Not cruel, not polite, genuine. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles with reverence usually reserved for saints. "Then stay," he whispered against her skin. "Stay and help me build something better than what my father had, something that doesn't need poison and shadows." "Something worth protecting," Elena added. "Yes." He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "Fair warning, the FBI will be watching. My enemies will regroup, and ruling this city has never been safe." "I know," Elena's smile was fierce, "but I didn't save your life just to watch you waste it. So if you're going to be king, Dante Moretti, you're going to be the kind worth saving." Dante laughed, a real laugh, rusty from disuse but honest. "Deal." The penthouse overlooked the city, lights glittering like fallen stars. Elena stood on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of copper and gold. Behind her, she heard Dante's footsteps, confident now, navigating the space he'd memorized through touch and sound. He wrapped his arms around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he murmured. "That we're either the smartest people in Chicago or the most foolish. Can't we be both?" She laughed, leaning into him. "Your physical therapist called. She says you're making remarkable progress." "I have motivation." His lips brushed her ear. "I want to see your face when I finally can." "What if I'm not what you imagined?" "Impossible." His fingers traced the curve of her jaw. "I know exactly what you look like. Brave, stubborn, beautiful in the way that matters." Elena turned in his arms, studying his face. The scars near his temple from the bomb, the sharp lines of his jaw, the dark glasses he still wore, though doctors said partial sight might return. "They're saying you've gone soft," she said. "Donating to hospitals, funding rehab programs, refusing to retaliate against the Valenti remnants." "Let them say it." Dante's smile was dangerous. "They'll learn soon enough mercy isn't weakness, it's strategy. A king who rules through fear dies young. A king who rules through loyalty becomes a legend," Elena finished. "Exactly." He kissed her then, slow and deep, the city lights glittering around them like a crown made of fire. "They said the Mafia king was blind. They said he was broken. But in the end, he was the only one who truly saw the value of the woman who had saved him, saw the chance to build something better from the ashes, saw that real power didn't come from fear. It came from having something worth protecting. And God help anyone who tried to take it from him. Because the devil of Chicago had found his salvation. And he would burn the world to keep it.